The look on my mother-in-law Helen's face that day? I'll never forget it. Her cheeks flushed red, then drained to a ghostly white, like all the blood had fled her body in defeat. She clutched the edges of the dining room table, her knuckles turning as pale as her expression, staring at the stack of papers I'd just laid out. Papers that proved everything. My husband Alex sat beside her, his confident smirk crumbling into something raw and regretful, his eyes darting between me and the documents like he was seeing a ghost from his own past. And there, in the middle of our family gathering turned battlefield, was Sarah, his ex, fidgeting with her necklace, realizing too late that her little scheme had unraveled. I stood there, calm as ever, my voice steady as I said, "This isn't about revenge, it's about the truth." But oh, the satisfaction of watching their world tilt on its axis? It was sweeter than I could have imagined. My name is Dr. Lena Kim, and at 32, I've built a life as a biologist in the heart of the city, diving into research that could change how we understand life itself. 8 years ago, I married Alex, a driven entrepreneur whose charm swept me off my feet. We had dreams, big ones, of blending our worlds, his business savvy and my scientific curiosity. But from the start, Helen made it clear she didn't approve. She came from a traditional family where women were expected to prioritize home and heirs above all else. My career? My late nights in the lab? To her, they were signs I was too modern, too focused on myself to be a proper wife. "Real women know their place," she'd say with that sharp smile, her words laced with disdain because I hadn't given her grandchildren yet. Little did I know, Alex had been hiding a secret that would expose the cracks in our foundation. A secret Helen not only knew about, but encouraged, all to push me out and reshape our family in her image. It started subtly, with odd glances and whispered phone calls, but when the truth began to surface, it hit like a storm. And through it all, I chose patience over fury, gathering facts like specimens under a microscope. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply letting the evidence speak for itself. It was a quiet Thursday evening when the first real crack appeared. Alex had come home later than usual, his tie loosened, carrying that faint scent of someone else's perfume, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't mine. I was in the kitchen, finishing up notes from the lab, when his phone buzzed on the counter. He'd left it face up, which wasn't like him. The preview on the lock screen read, "Ethan misses his daddy. When are you coming to see us again? S." My stomach dropped, but I didn't touch it. Not yet. I just stood there, staring at the words until the screen went dark. Ethan. A child's name. And us. I knew Sarah's name, Alex's college girlfriend, the one he described as ancient history, with a laugh whenever she came up in conversation. But this didn't feel like history. This felt present. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I waited until he was in the shower, then quietly picked up the phone. The passcode was still our wedding date. Ironic, really. The messages went back months. Photos of a little boy with Alex's dark hair and crooked smile, playing in a park I didn't recognize. Birthday cards. A video of the boy blowing out 5 candles, while Sarah's voice sang off-key in the background. My hands were steady as I scrolled, but inside I felt like glass about to shatter. Alex had a son. A 5-year-old son he'd never mentioned. And from the tone of the messages, Sarah wasn't just an ex anymore. She was someone who expected things. Money transfers, weekend visits, promises. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it and went to bed before he finished showering. When he slid in beside me and kissed my shoulder like nothing was wrong, I pretended to be asleep. But my mind was racing. Why hide this? We'd talked about children. We'd agreed to wait until my research grant was stable, until his company had its next funding round. I'd never pressured him, never made him feel inadequate for not having kids yet. So why keep an entire child a secret? The answer came the following Sunday at Helen's house. We were having one of her mandatory family dinners. the kind where she spent the entire afternoon reminding everyone how things should be done. Helen had never hidden her disappointment in me. From the day Alex brought me home, she'd made it clear I wasn't what she'd pictured for her only son. Too educated, too independent, too focused on petri dishes and publications instead of babies and Sunday roasts. She'd once told me, with a tight smile, that real women build families, not resumes. I'd smiled back and changed the subject. I always did. That afternoon, she was in rare form. As soon as we sat down, she launched in. "You know, Lena, I ran into Margaret Ellison at the club yesterday. Her daughter-in-law just announced baby number 3. 3, Lena, at 31 years old." She paused to sip her wine, eyes fixed on me. Some women just know how to prioritize. Alex shifted beside me, but said nothing. I kept my voice even. "That's wonderful for them. We're happy with where we are right now." Helen gave a little laugh, like I'd told a joke. "Happy? 8 years and still no grandchildren? I'm starting to think there's something wrong on your end, dear. Not that I'd be surprised. Spending all those hours in a lab can't be good for a woman's body." The table went quiet. Alex's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't snap back. I never did. "Mother," Alex said weakly, "can we not do this today?" "Oh, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Helen replied, waving a hand. "If Lena cared as much about this family as she does about her little experiments, maybe we'd have something to celebrate by now." I looked down at my plate, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3. When I raised my eyes, I met hers calmly. "I care very much about this family, Helen. More than you know." She smirked, clearly taking my silence as surrender, and in that moment, watching her bask in what she thought was victory, something clicked inside me. She didn't just want grandchildren. She wanted me gone, replaced by someone who fit her vision of the perfect daughter-in-law, someone softer, more traditional, more fertile. And from the way Alex avoided my gaze, I wondered how much he'd already shared with her about Sarah and Ethan. That night, driving home, I made a decision. I wouldn't rage. I wouldn't accuse. I would gather facts, clear, undeniable, scientific facts. And when the time came, I would lay them out like evidence in a peer-reviewed study. Because Helen had spent years treating me like I was inadequate, and Alex had let her. But they were about to learn that inadequacy wasn't the same as weakness. If you were sitting at that dinner table, hearing those words thrown at you in front of your own husband, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have started planning your next move? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. The weeks after that dinner passed in a strange kind of quiet. Alex was attentive in ways he hadn't been for years, bringing home flowers, suggesting weekend getaways, asking about my latest research as if he suddenly remembered I had a life outside our apartment. I smiled, thanked him, and kept my routine exactly the same. Early mornings in the lab, late nights analyzing data. But now, a portion of those late nights belonged to something else entirely. I started small. A few strands of Alex's hair from his brush, carefully collected and sealed in a sterile envelope. A screenshot of the messages I'd seen, timestamps and all. Nothing dramatic, just evidence, the kind a scientist trusts. Then came Helen's birthday celebration. She'd rented out the private room at her favorite country club, the one with the heavy drapes and crystal chandeliers that made everything feel like a staged performance. White tablecloths, place cards in calligraphy, a 3-tiered cake that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Helen loved an audience, and she'd invited everyone. Old family friends, Alex's business associates, even a few cousins I'd only met once. I arrived with Alex, dressed in the navy sheath dress he'd once said made me look elegant but approachable. He squeezed my hand as we walked in, like we were any normal couple celebrating his mother's milestone. I squeezed back, just enough to keep up appearances. The evening started pleasantly enough. Toasts were made. Helen glowed in a pale pink suit, accepting compliments with practiced humility. Then, halfway through dessert, the doors to the private room opened again. In walked Sarah. She was prettier than the old photos I'd found online. Blonde hair swept into a low bun, wearing a soft green dress that hugged her figure just right. And holding her hand was Ethan, dressed in a tiny blazer and bow tie, looking around the room with wide, curious eyes. He was a beautiful child, healthy, bright-eyed, clutching a small wrapped gift like he'd been coached on what to do. Helen stood immediately, arms outstretched. "There's my birthday surprise," she announced to the room, loud enough for every head to turn. "Come here, darling boy." Ethan ran to her, and she scooped him up, planting kisses on his cheeks, while Sarah followed with a triumphant little smile. The guests murmured appreciatively, "How sweet! What a lovely family moment!" Alex froze beside me. I felt his fingers go slack around mine. Helen carried Ethan around the table like a trophy, stopping at each cluster of guests. "This is my grandson," she said over and over, beaming. "Isn't he just the image of his father at that age?" When she reached our side, she paused dramatically. "Lena, dear, you haven't met Ethan properly yet, have you?" Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Sarah and little Ethan are part of the family now. I thought it was time everyone knew." The room went quieter. A few awkward coughs. Someone's wine glass clinked too loudly against a plate. Sarah extended her hand to me, that same triumphant smile in place. "So nice to finally meet you, Lena. Alex has told me so much about your work." I shook her hand calmly. "It's nice to meet you both. Ethan, what a handsome young man you are." He gave me a shy grin, and something in my chest twisted. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, aching sadness for the lies this child had already been tangled in. Helen wasn't finished. "You know," she said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "I always prayed for grandchildren. Real ones. The kind that carry the family name forward. And look, God answered." She kissed Ethan's forehead again. "Better late than never." A few guests chuckled nervously. One older woman actually clapped. Alex finally found his voice. "Mother, maybe we should—" "Oh, hush, Alex," Helen cut him off. "Everyone here is family, or close enough. No more secrets." I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for the humiliated wife to react. Tears, a scene, a dramatic exit. Instead, I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. "Helen," I said quietly, "you've put together a lovely party. Thank you for including me." Her smile faltered for half a second. She'd expected a fight. She'd wanted one. Sarah leaned in, voice low but not low enough. "Don't worry, Lena. I'm not here to take anything that matters to you. Just giving Ethan the family he deserves." I met her eyes. "Children deserve honesty more than anything. I completely agree." She blinked, unsure whether that was a jab or not. Helen, sensing her moment slipping, moved on to the next table, still carrying Ethan like a prize. The conversation in the room resumed, but the air had changed, thick with gossip waiting to spread. Alex leaned close. "Lena, I can explain." "Not here," I said softly. "We'll talk at home." He nodded, looking miserable. On the drive back, he tried anyway. Words tumbled out. How it happened before we met. How Sarah reached out years later saying she was pregnant. How he'd paid support quietly to avoid scandal. how Helen had found out last year and insisted on doing things properly. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I asked, staring out the window. "I was afraid you'd leave." I didn't respond, because the truth was, I was still deciding whether I would. But one thing was clear now. Helen hadn't just tolerated the secret, she'd weaponized it. She wanted me out, not because I hadn't given her grandchildren, but because I never would in the way she demanded. She wanted a daughter-in-law who stayed home, who prioritized legacy over everything else. Sarah fit that mold. I never had. And tonight, she'd made her move in front of an audience, thinking public humiliation would force me to retreat quietly. She really should have known better than to underestimate a woman who spends her days proving hypotheses with cold, hard data. The next morning, while Alex was still asleep, I took Ethan's gift ribbon, bright blue, with a few stray hairs caught in the knot, and sealed it in another sterile envelope. Specimen number 2. The days after Helen's birthday felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened with everything left unsaid. Alex tried to bridge the gap, small gestures, longer conversations, even suggesting we see a counselor. I listened, nodded in all the right places, and kept collecting. The ribbon from Ethan's gift went straight to my lab under a false sample label. I ran the paternity test myself, late at night when the building was empty and the hum of the equipment was the only company I needed. The results came back exactly as I'd expected. 99.999% probability that Alex was the father. The data was clean, irrefutable. I printed 2 copies, one for my files, one to keep at home in a locked drawer. I wasn't rushing to confrontation. Not yet. I needed to understand the full picture, how deep the deception went, how much Helen had orchestrated, and what Sarah's role really was beyond showing up with a child in tow. So I watched and listened. Helen wasted no time capitalizing on her victory. A few days after the party, photos started appearing on her private Facebook group, the one for close family and friends. Ethan front and center, grinning on Helen's lap at the country club, captioned, "Finally, a real grandson to carry on the family name." Another showed Sarah and Helen toasting with champagne, welcoming new beginnings. The comments poured in, heart emojis, congratulations, a few thinly veiled digs about how wonderful it was to have biological family around at last. One comment from Helen's oldest friend stood out. "About time Alex stopped waiting for miracles that never came." I read them on my phone during a coffee break at work, feeling the sting but letting it settle into resolve instead of rage. Helen wasn't just celebrating a grandchild. She was publicly erasing me. That same week, Sarah texted Alex, something I saw only because he'd left his laptop open while grabbing coffee one morning. The message preview. "Ethan keeps asking when he gets to see Grandma Helen again. Maybe a weekend at the lake house soon? He'd love more time with his dad, too." The lake house. Our lake house. The one Alex and I had bought as an investment. A quiet escape we'd planned to use once my grant cycle slowed down. I'd never even spent a full weekend there yet. Alex's reply. "Let me talk to Mom. We'll figure something out." Mom. Not me. I closed the laptop gently and went back to my notes as if nothing had happened. That evening, Helen called the house phone, something she rarely did unless she wanted an audience. Alex put her on speaker while he cooked, thinking it was harmless. "Lena, dear, are you there?" she began, voice syrupy. "I'm here," I answered from the living room couch. "Good. I wanted to invite you both to the lake house next weekend. Sarah and Ethan will be coming up Friday night. It'll be lovely. Fresh air, boating. Ethan's never been on a boat, the poor thing. I thought it was time he experienced the family property properly." Alex glanced at me, eyes pleading for me to go along. I kept my tone neutral. "That sounds nice. I'll have to check my lab schedule, but I hope Ethan enjoys it." Helen paused, clearly expecting resistance. When none came, she pressed on. Well, naturally, if you're too busy with work, we'll manage without you. Someone has to keep things running smoothly for the boys' first visit. There it was, the velvet-gloved shove. Alex winced. Mother. No, Helen interrupted. Lena understands priorities. Don't you, dear? I do, I said calmly. Family comes first. She ended the call satisfied, thinking she'd drawn another line in the sand and I'd stayed politely on my side of it. Alex turned to me after hanging up. I'm sorry. I'll tell her we're both coming, or no one is. I touched his arm lightly. It's all right. Let them have their weekend. Ethan should get to know the place. He searched my face, confused by my lack of anger. You're not upset? I am processing, I said, which was true. We'll talk more when we're both ready. He nodded, relieved, and went back to stirring the sauce. What he didn't know was that while he cooked, I was already planning the next step. I'd booked a quiet Airbnb 20 minutes from the lake house for that same weekend. Close enough to observe, far enough to stay unseen. I told Alex I had a short research retreat, something I'd done before, no questions asked. I wasn't going to spy in some dramatic movie villain way. I just wanted to see how they behaved when they thought I wasn't watching. How Helen treated Ethan versus how she'd always treated the idea of children from me. How Sarah fit herself into our spaces. And most importantly, how Alex acted when the pressure of pretending was off. Because science is about patterns, repeatable observations, and I was starting to see a very clear one. Helen didn't just want a grandchild, she wanted control. She wanted the family narrative rewritten with me edited out entirely. Sarah was willing to play along for security, and Alex, my husband, was too afraid of conflict to stop it. But fear isn't the same as consent, and silence isn't the same as surrender. That weekend at the lake would give me the final variables I needed. After that, the experiment would move into its final phase, presentation of results. Helen thought she was directing the story. She had no idea I was the one holding the data. The weekend at the lake arrived faster than I expected. I kissed Alex goodbye on Friday morning, told him to drive safely, and wished him a good time with his mother and Ethan. He looked relieved, almost grateful, that I wasn't making a fuss. He had no idea I'd be closer than he thought. The Airbnb I'd booked was a small cabin tucked into the woods on the opposite shore. Far enough away that binoculars weren't necessary, but close enough that the dock and main house were clearly visible through the trees. I arrived just after lunch, unpacked a few essentials, and settled onto the porch with a thermos of coffee and my notebook. They showed up around 4. Helen's SUV pulled into the gravel drive first, followed by Sarah's smaller sedan. Ethan bounced out of the back seat before the engine was off, running straight to the water's edge with the kind of uncontained joy only a child can have. Helen followed, arms loaded with grocery bags and a new-looking child's fishing rod still in its packaging. Sarah carried a cooler and a stack of beach towels. Alex brought up the rear, hauling suitcases and looking like a man trying very hard to keep everyone happy. I watched through the lens of my phone's zoom. Nothing invasive, just enough to observe the dynamics. Helen wasted no time taking charge. She set Ethan up on the dock with the fishing rod, kneeling beside him to show him how to cast, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. Every time he giggled or pointed at a dragonfly skimming the water, she lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside her. Sarah hovered nearby, snapping photos, calling out encouragement. Alex stood back at first, then joined them, helping Ethan reel in the empty line with exaggerated excitement when the bobber dipped. It was sweet, undeniably sweet, and it hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not because they looked like a perfect little family, but because I could see how easily Alex slipped into the role of father when no one was judging him for it. How naturally he lifted Ethan onto his shoulders for a better view of the lake. How Helen's laughter rang out across the water when the boy splashed her with an accidental kick. I sat there until dusk, taking notes. Not angry ones, just observations. Who spoke to whom? Who deferred to Helen's instructions? How often Sarah touched Alex's arm? How quickly Ethan ran to Helen when he scraped his knee on the dock. By Saturday evening, they'd built a fire in the pit near the water. Marshmallows, hot dogs, the whole nostalgic ritual. Helen told stories about Alex as a boy, fishing trips with his late father, summers spent right on that same dock. Sarah listened attentively, adding her own anecdotes about Ethan's preschool adventures. Alex stayed mostly quiet, tending the fire, occasionally glancing toward the road like he half expected me to appear. I didn't. Instead, I drove into town for dinner alone, then returned to my cabin and ran the final cross-check on the DNA samples. I'd already known the results, but seeing them again, black and white, percentages and markers, grounded me. This wasn't emotion. This was fact. Sunday morning brought the moment I'd been waiting for without realizing it. Helen and Sarah took Ethan out on the pontoon boat, our boat, the one Alex and I had christened with a bottle of champagne the day we closed on the property. I watched from my porch as Helen steered slowly along the shoreline, pointing out herons and turtles, while Sarah helped Ethan trail his fingers in the water. Alex stayed behind on the dock, waving them off. Then Helen did something that made my breath catch. She handed Ethan a small velvet pouch, helped him open it, and pulled out a delicate gold chain with a tiny pendant, a family crest, the same one engraved on the signet ring Alex's father had worn. She fastened it around the boy's neck with careful fingers, kissing the top of his head afterward. Sarah took a photo. Helen posed proudly beside them. And in that moment, I understood the depth of it. This wasn't just about a grandchild. This was Helen claiming legacy, rewriting history to include Ethan and exclude me entirely. The crest wasn't something she'd ever offered to future children Alex and I might have had. It was reserved in her mind for real bloodline. I closed my notebook and packed my things. On the drive home late that afternoon, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. Alex arrived back in the city around 8, tired but relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. He dropped the bags in the hallway and pulled me into a hug. "It was good," he said quietly. "Ethan had the best time. Thank you for giving us the space." I hugged him back. I'm glad he enjoyed it. He pulled away, searching my face. "You're really okay with all this?" "I'm okay with the truth," I said. "And I think it's time we all dealt with it together." He nodded slowly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. That night, I printed the full paternity report, both samples, full analysis, lab seals, and chain of custody documentation. I also pulled the financial records I'd quietly requested from our joint accounts, the monthly transfers to Sarah over the past 5 years, labeled vaguely as consulting fees or business expenses. I placed everything in a simple manila folder. Then I texted Helen. "Would you and Sarah join Alex and me for dinner next Saturday? I'd like us to talk openly, as a family. I'll cook." She replied within minutes. "About time we cleared the air. We'll be there." I set the phone down and looked out our window at the city lights. Helen thought she was walking into a surrender. She had no idea she was walking into a presentation. If you'd spent a weekend watching your life being quietly rewritten from a distance, would you have come home ready to fight? Or ready to lay out the facts and let them speak for themselves? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Saturday arrived with a crisp fall chill in the air, the kind that makes everything feel sharper, clearer. I spent the morning in the kitchen preparing a simple but thoughtful dinner. Roasted chicken with herbs from the balcony garden, wild rice, and a green salad with the vinaigrette Helen had once complimented at a holiday meal. Nothing flashy, just familiar, comfortable foods that wouldn't give anyone an excuse to complain about fancy city nonsense. Alex hovered nearby, nervous energy radiating off him. He'd asked 3 times if I was sure about this, if maybe we should meet on neutral ground instead. Each time I reassured him with the same calm smile. "This is our home. I said the last time. If we're going to talk about family, it should be here. He finally nodded and went to set the table, placing the good dishes with more care than usual. Helen and Sarah arrived precisely at 6. Helen in a tailored sweater set and pearls, Sarah in a soft sweater dress that made her look approachable, maternal. Ethan wasn't with them. Helen had apparently decided he was too young for serious adult conversations, which was probably wise, though I suspected it also kept the evening focused on her narrative. I greeted them at the door with genuine warmth, taking their coats, offering a glass of wine or sparkling water. Helen accepted wine with a tight smile, looking around the apartment as if checking for changes she could criticize. Sarah took water, her eyes darting to Alex with a mix of hope and uncertainty. We made small talk through appetizers, the weather, Alex's latest project at work, Sarah's part-time graphic design gigs. Surface level, polite. I let it flow, refilling glasses, keeping the tone light. Then, as we moved to the dining table and I served the main course, I shifted the conversation gently. "I'm glad you both came tonight," I said, passing the rice to Helen. "There's been a lot unspoken lately, and I think it's time we addressed it openly, for everyone's sake." Helen set her fork down with a deliberate clink. "Well, finally. I've been waiting for you to acknowledge reality, Lena. It's not healthy to pretend problems don't exist." Sarah glanced at Alex, who kept his eyes on his plate. I nodded. "I agree completely. Pretending never solves anything, which is why I've spent the last few weeks making sure I had all the facts straight." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Facts?" "Yes." I reached beside my chair and lifted the manila folder I'd placed there earlier. It was unassuming, professional, the kind I use for grant proposals. I laid it on the table between us, not dramatically, just matter-of-factly. "These are the results of 2 independent paternity tests," I said quietly. "One using Alex's hair sample, one using a few strands from the ribbon on Ethan's birthday gift at your party. They confirm what we all already suspected. Ethan is Alex's biological son." Sarah's face flushed pink. Alex finally looked up, his expression a mix of shame and relief. Helen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "And you felt the need to play detective? Really, Lena, this obsession—" "It wasn't obsession," I interrupted gently, still calm. "It was verification. Because secrets this big affect more than just one person. They affect trust, finances, future plans." I opened the folder and slid the top report across to her. Clear graphs, percentages, lab certification stamps. Helen glanced at it, then pushed it back like it burned her fingers. "We all knew this already. What's your point?" "My point," I said, turning to the next set of pages, "is that for 5 years, Alex has been transferring money to Sarah from our joint accounts. Money labeled as business expenses, but actually supporting a second household." I placed the bank statements next, highlighted lines showing regular payments, amounts increasing over time as Ethan grew and needs changed. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "That was child support. Perfectly reasonable." "Of course it was," I agreed. "And I don't fault anyone for supporting a child. What I do take issue with is that it was done in secret, without my knowledge or consent, from accounts I contribute to every month." Alex cleared his throat. "Lena, I touched his hand lightly. "We'll talk more later, just us. Tonight is about clarity for everyone." Helen's voice sharpened. "You're making this about money now? After all these years of failing to give him a child, you want to punish him for having one elsewhere?" I met her gaze steadily. "This isn't about punishment, Helen. And it's certainly not about blame for not having children yet. That's a separate conversation Alex and I will have privately. This is about honesty. You've spent years implying I'm inadequate because I prioritize my career. You've celebrated Ethan publicly while erasing me privately. And you've encouraged Alex to hide an entire family from his wife." Helen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no immediate retort. Sarah spoke up softly. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted Ethan to have his father. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. But the way this was handled hurt everyone, including Ethan, who's growing up in a web of half-truths. I turned to the final document, a simple spreadsheet I'd prepared, outlining the total amount transferred over 5 years, adjusted for what fair child support might have looked like if discussed openly. I'm not here to demand repayment or create enemies, I said. I'm here to propose a new way forward, one where everything is transparent, where Ethan is fully welcomed, supported, and loved, without anyone having to hide or pretend. But that requires trust, and trust requires truth. The room fell silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock. Alex reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it hard. His eyes were wet. Helen stared at the papers, then at me, something shifting behind her carefully composed features. Not full surrender, Helen wasn't built for that, but the slow realization that her strategy of public triumph and private pressure had backfired. She'd expected tears, accusations, a dramatic exit. Instead, she'd gotten data. Calm, organized, undeniable data. And for a woman who prided herself on controlling the narrative, that was perhaps the most unsettling outcome of all. I served dessert, apple tart with vanilla ice cream, and the conversation moved to tentative next steps. But the power in the room had shifted, quietly and irreversibly. The evidence had spoken, and for the first time in years, everyone was finally listening. Dessert passed in a hush that wasn't quite awkward, but wasn't comfortable either. The apple tart sat mostly untouched except for a few polite bites. Helen kept her eyes on her plate longer than usual, turning her fork over and over as if it held some hidden answer. Sarah traced the rim of her water glass with one finger, glancing occasionally at Alex, who hadn't lifted his gaze from the tablecloth since I'd laid out the financial summary. I let the silence stretch just long enough, then spoke softly. I didn't prepare all of this to corner anyone, I said. I did it because we can't build anything real on secrets. Ethan deserves better than that. We all do. Sarah was the first to respond. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I never meant for it to go this far. When I reached out to Alex 5 years ago, I was alone, struggling. He helped, and I let it stay quiet because it was easier. Then Helen got involved and things snowballed. Helen's head snapped up at that, a flash of defensiveness in her eyes, but she pressed her lips together and said nothing. Alex finally spoke, his words rough around the edges. I should have told you from the beginning, Lena. I was ashamed, scared of losing you. And when Mom found out, she convinced me that bringing it into the open would only hurt everyone more. I went along because it was the path of least resistance. I nodded, absorbing it all without interruption. This was the part I'd waited for, not the defenses, but the admissions, the truth, raw and unpolished. Helen cleared her throat, sitting straighter. I won't apologize for wanting my son to be a father to his child. Blood matters. Legacy matters. You may think that's old-fashioned, Lena, but it's who we are. I don't think it's old-fashioned to want to be a grandmother, I replied evenly. What I struggle with is the way it was done. The public celebrations that left me looking like a stranger in my own marriage. The implication that I was somehow less because I haven't had children yet. That hurt Helen. Deeply. Her gaze flickered, something close to discomfort, maybe even a flicker of guilt. She wasn't used to being called out so directly, yet so gently. Sarah leaned forward. I'm sorry for my part in that. Truly. I let Helen's excitement pull me along. It felt good to be welcomed after years of doing it alone. I turned to her. I don't blame you for wanting stability for Ethan. But moving forward, we need boundaries that protect everyone, including him. He's young. He doesn't need to grow up sensing tension or division. Alex reached across the table toward Sarah, then toward his mother, a gesture of reconciliation rather than alliance.
Lena's right. We've all made choices that got us here. The question is, what we do now.
I slid a fresh sheet of paper from the folder, one I'd prepared that morning. It was a simple proposal, printed neatly. Formal acknowledgement of paternity and updated legal documents for Ethan's benefit. Transparent child support agreement, reviewed by neutral attorneys, paid from Alex's personal income rather than joint accounts. Shared family fund for Ethan's education and health needs, with both Alex and me as signatories. Scheduled family time that includes everyone. No more separate celebrations or public exclusions. Counseling for Alex and me, and an open invitation for Helen and Sarah to join family therapy sessions if they wished. Nothing punitive, nothing designed to wound. Just structure, clarity, fairness. I pushed it to the center of the table. This isn't an ultimatum, I said. It's an invitation to do this the right way, together. Or, if anyone prefers, we can involve lawyers and courts and turn it into something adversarial. I'd rather not. Helen stared at the paper for a long moment. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes, weighing pride against the very real risk of losing access to her grandson if bridges burned too thoroughly. Finally, she exhaled through her nose. You've thought this through. I have, I said. Because I care about this family. All of it. Including Ethan. Sarah picked up the proposal, scanning it quickly. Relief softened her features. This feels fair. More than fair. Alex looked at me, eyes shining with something that might have been gratitude, or regret, or both.
I'll sign whatever you need. Tonight, if you want.
I shook my head gently. We'll take it to professionals first. Make sure it's solid. Helen folded her hands in her lap. And if I don't agree? I met her gaze without flinching. Then we'll proceed without your signature where it's not required. But I hope you'll choose to be part of a solution instead of part of the division. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her wine glass, took a measured sip, and set it down with deliberate care. I raised my son to take responsibility, she said at last. Perhaps it's time I did the same. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't even close. But for Helen, it was as close as she might ever come. We ended the evening soon after. Coats were retrieved, quiet goodnights exchanged. No hugs, but no sharp words either. A tentative truce. When the door closed behind them, Alex turned to me and simply wrapped his arms around me, holding on like he was afraid I'd vanish. I don't deserve you, he whispered into my hair. No, I said softly, resting my head against his chest. But we're going to work on that. Together. Outside, the city hummed below our windows, indifferent and alive. Inside, the folder lay closed on the table, its contents no longer weapons but blueprints. The hardest part, the confrontation, was over. The longer part, rebuilding trust, integrating Ethan, healing the wounds, lay ahead. But for the first time in months, I felt like we were all standing on the same solid ground. And that was more than I dared to hope for. The weeks that followed the dinner were strangely peaceful, like the quiet after a storm when the air feels washed clean. Lawyers were involved, but only in the most straightforward way, drafting agreements, updating documents, making everything official and above board. Alex signed the new child support terms without hesitation, rerouting payments from his personal earnings. The shared education fund was set up with both our names on it, and I volunteered to manage the medical portion, given my background. Ethan's world expanded in small, gentle increments. First, a Saturday afternoon at the park with Alex and me together. No Helen, no Sarah, just the three of us. I brought a kite from the Science Museum gift shop. the kind with a simple aerodynamic design that practically flies itself. Ethan's eyes went wide when it soared high above the trees on the first try. He laughed so hard he had to sit down in the grass to catch his breath. Alex watched us, something unreadable softening in his face. Afterward, we got ice cream. Ethan asked if I was a real scientist. I told him yes, and that scientists spend a lot of time figuring out why things fly, or grow, or glow in the dark. He declared he wanted to be a scientist too, but also a fireman. I told him that was an excellent combination. Helen heard about the outing from Alex and called the next day, her tone clipped but curious. "How did it go?" "It went well," I said. "He's a bright, happy boy. You must be very proud." A pause, then quieter. "I am." She didn't push to be included right away, which surprised me. Instead, she waited until Alex suggested a small family cookout at our apartment a couple of weeks later. Neutral territory, low pressure. Sarah brought a pasta salad. Helen arrived with her famous lemon bars and a new board game she'd bought for the child. Ethan dominated the game, with occasional strategic advice from me and enthusiastic cheering from everyone else. There were still moments of tension. Old habits die hard. Helen once started a sentence with, "When Ethan spends more time here," and caught herself mid-air, glancing at me. I finished plating the burgers and said mildly, "We'll all figure out a schedule that feels right for him." She nodded and changed the subject. Sarah and I found our own tentative rhythm. One afternoon, she texted me directly, something she'd never done before, asking about pediatric allergists. Ethan had developed a mild reaction to tree nuts, and she wanted a second opinion. I sent her the name of a colleague's husband who specialized in pediatric immunology, along with a few recent studies on early exposure protocols. She replied with a simple, "Thank you, truly." It wasn't friendship yet, but it was respect. That was enough. Alex and I started counseling twice a month. The therapist was kind but direct, pushing us to name the fears we'd both carried. His fear of confrontation, my fear of being seen as the cold career woman Helen had painted me to be. We talked about children, ours someday, if we both still wanted them. No rush, no pressure, just possibility. One evening in early winter, Helen invited us all to her house for an early holiday gathering. It was the first time she'd extended the invitation to me personally, not through Alex. I accepted. The house was decorated exactly as it always was. Elegant, traditional, a little formal. But there were new touches. A stocking with Ethan's name already hung by the fireplace, right beside one that read Lena. Not squeezed in as an afterthought, but placed deliberately in the lineup. During dinner, Helen raised her glass for a toast. "To family," she said, her eyes moving around the table. Ethan coloring quietly on a placemat. Sarah smiling softly. Alex holding my hand under the table. All of it. However it grows. It wasn't perfect. There were still silences where old resentments lingered. Helen would probably always lean traditional, and I would always lean toward my lab. But the sharp edges had dulled. Later, while the others played cards in the living room, Helen found me in the kitchen refilling coffee. She hesitated in the doorway, then spoke. "I was wrong to handle things the way I did. I thought I was protecting legacy, but I was pushing people away, including you." I turned to face her, surprised by the directness. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "It means a lot." She nodded once, briskly, the closest she might ever come to tears. "Don't expect me to turn into some modern free spirit overnight," I smiled. "I wouldn't dream of it." She almost smiled back. Almost. As we drove home that night, snow starting to dust the windshield, Alex reached over and laced his fingers through mine. "I never thought we'd get here," he said quietly. "Me neither," I replied. "But data doesn't lie, and neither does time if you give it a chance to heal." He squeezed my hand. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat on the way home from Helen's, his head against the window, the new stocking stuffer, a glow-in-the-dark constellation globe, clutched in his lap.
I looked at him in the rearview mirror, then at Alex, and finally out at the quiet, snow-lit city. The experiment wasn't over. Families never really are. But the results, so far, were better than I could have hypothesized. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged. Not in spite of who I am, but because of it. Spring came early that year, with cherry blossoms lining the streets and a softness in the air that made everything feel possible again. Ethan turned 6 in April, and we celebrated quietly. No grand country club affair, just a small party in our apartment with a dinosaur-themed cake he'd picked out himself from the bakery downstairs. Helen arrived with a gift that surprised me, a child-sized lab coat, embroidered with Dr. Ethan on the pocket, and a beginner science kit full of safe, colorful experiments. She handed it to him with a gruff, "Your Lena suggested you might like this sort of thing." The pause before my name was small, but I heard it, and the effort behind it. Sarah brought a handmade piñata shaped like a T-Rex, filled with candy and little plastic dinosaurs. Alex manned the grill on our balcony, flipping burgers while Ethan ran circles around everyone, roaring in his new lab coat. It was chaotic in the best way, the kind of noise that fills a home instead of echoing through it. After cake,
While Ethan tested out his new volcano kit on the kitchen table, with strict supervision and a lot of baking soda, Helen pulled me aside into the living room. "I owe you more than I've said," she began, her voice lower than usual. She clutched her handbag like a shield. "I spent years convinced that family had to look a certain way, that if it didn't fit the picture I had in my head, it wasn't worth having. I was wrong, and I nearly cost my son and my grandson the kind of stability they actually needed." I waited, giving her space. She continued, eyes on the floor. "When you laid out those papers that night, I was furious. Not at you, at myself, really. Because you were right. I'd been orchestrating things, pushing Alex to keep quiet, encouraging Sarah to step forward more boldly. I thought I was protecting legacy. Turns out I was just protecting my own pride." She finally looked up. "You handled it with more grace than I ever showed you. And you've been nothing but kind to Ethan. I won't forget that." It wasn't a fairy tale apology. There were no tears, no dramatic embrace. But it was honest. And for Helen, honesty without defensiveness was rare currency. I reached out and touched her arm lightly. "Thank you for saying that. We're all learning as we go. The important thing is that Ethan gets to grow up knowing he's loved by everyone in this room." She nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Ethan was asleep on our couch under a blanket printed with constellations, Alex and I stood at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the dishes side by side. He bumped my shoulder gently. "You know, when all this started, I thought I was going to lose you. I couldn't imagine a version of this life where you stayed." I handed him a plate to dry. "I considered leaving," I admitted. "More than once. But I realized walking away would mean letting someone else write the ending for us. And I've never been good at letting other people control the narrative." He laughed softly, the sound warm and familiar. "No, you're not." We finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When the last glass was put away, he turned to me, drying his hands on a towel. "I'm proud of the way you handled everything," he said. "Not just the evidence or the boundaries, but the way you opened the door for Ethan, and for Mom, to be part of something better. You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "But family isn't just about blood, Alex. It's about who shows up, and who chooses to stay." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me close while the city lights flickered beyond our windows. A few months later, my research team published a paper that made quiet waves in our field, a new protocol for early detection of a rare genetic marker. The acknowledgement section included a dedication I hadn't told anyone about beforehand. To E,
whose curiosity reminds me daily why we ask questions in the first place. When Ethan saw his initial in print, he carried the journal around for a week, showing it to anyone who would look. Helen framed a copy for her living room. Sarah sent flowers to my lab with a card that simply read, "Thank you for making room." And Alex? He started leaving his phone face up on the counter again. Trust, it turned out, wasn't a single moment of revelation. It was 1,000 small ones, built day by day, choice by choice. Some people might have called it compromise. I called it victory. The kind that doesn't require anyone to lose, just everyone to grow. Summer settled over the city like a warm blanket, the kind that makes evenings stretch long and lazy. Ethan had just finished kindergarten, and we marked the milestone with a weekend at the lake house. This time, all of us together. No separate trips, no hushed plans. Just one big, slightly chaotic group descending on the property with coolers, sunscreen, and a trunk full of water toys.
I drove up with Alex and Ethan, the boy chattering non-stop in the back seat about the frog he'd caught at school and released into the pond. Alex kept glancing at me across the console, a small private smile playing at the corners of his mouth whenever Ethan called me Lena, with that easy affection kids develop when they feel safe. Helen and Sarah arrived an hour after us. Helen stepped out of her SUV with a large straw hat and a cooler she insisted on carrying herself. I'm not that old yet. Sarah unloaded a folding wagon piled with beach chairs and a new kayak paddle Ethan had been begging for. The weekend unfolded without a script, which was exactly what it needed to feel real. Mornings were slow. Coffee on the dock while Ethan hunted for skipping stones. Helen taught him her childhood technique, wrist flick, flat stone, low angle, and beamed when he managed 4 skips on his 3rd try. Sarah and I took the kayak out together one afternoon, paddling to the quiet cove where the herons nested. We didn't talk about the past at first. We talked about work, her freelance design clients, my latest grant renewal. Then, gradually, about motherhood. I used to think I had to do it all alone, she said, trailing her fingers in the water. It felt safer than risking rejection. I'm glad that's not true anymore. I nodded. None of us have to do it alone, not if we choose differently. Evenings brought firelight and s'mores. Alex built the fire the way his father had taught him, teepee style, plenty of kindling, and told Ethan stories about growing up on that same lake. Helen added her own embellishments, correcting Alex on details with mock indignation until everyone was laughing. One night, after Ethan had finally crashed in the loft bedroom, the 4 adults lingered on the porch with glasses of wine and the quiet hum of crickets. Fireflies blinked across the yard like tiny lanterns. Helen spoke first, her voice softer than the darkness around us.
I never thought I'd say this, she began, swirling her glass. But I was terrified of change, of what it would mean if the family I pictured didn't come together exactly as I planned. I held on so tight I nearly broke it. She looked at me across the circle of Adirondack chairs. You didn't let me break it. You insisted on something better. I resented that at first. Then I realized I needed it. Sarah raised her glass slightly. To something better. We all drank to that. Alex reached for my hand in the dark, his thumb tracing slow circles over my knuckles. Later, when the others had gone inside, he and I stayed on the dock, feet dangling over the water. The moon laid a silver path across the lake straight to us. Do you ever regret staying? He asked quietly. I thought about it, really thought. About the nights I'd lain awake cataloging betrayals. About the folder of evidence. About the version of me who had considered walking away clean. No, I said finally, because staying didn't mean accepting what happened. It meant choosing what came next. And what came next has been worth it. He leaned his head against mine. I love you, he said. The you who fights with facts and grace. The you who makes room for complicated people. All of it. I smiled into the darkness. I love you too. The you who's learning to stand up, even when it's hard. We sat there until the moon climbed higher, the water lapping gently against the post below us. Inside, Ethan murmured in his sleep. Helen's light clicked off upstairs. Sarah's soft footsteps padded to her room. The house felt full. Not perfect, not without its scars, but full in a way it hadn't been before. I thought about the woman I'd been at the start of all this. Careful, watchful, gathering evidence in the shadows because I didn't trust my own voice to be enough. She'd been strong in her own way. But the woman sitting on the dock now, feet in the water, hand in her husband's, part of a noisy, imperfect family breathing quietly upstairs, she was stronger. Not because she'd won some dramatic battle, but because she'd chosen to build something lasting out of the pieces. And that, I realized, was the quietest kind of triumph there is. Years have a way of slipping by when life finally settles into a rhythm that feels like home. Ethan is 10 now, tall for his age, with Alex's dark hair and a curiosity that never switches off. He spends weekends split between our apartment, Sarah's cozy house across town, and Helen's place, where he's mastered the art of beating her at Scrabble, using science words she has to look up. He calls me Lena still, no forced titles, just the name he chose when he was small, and it stuck. But on school forms, under parent-guardian, both Alex and I are listed equally, and that quiet line on paper means more to me than any grand gesture ever could. My lab has grown. The protocol we developed all those years ago became the foundation for a larger study, and now I lead a small team that collaborates with hospitals across the country. I travel sometimes, present at conferences, publish. But I'm home most nights, cooking dinner while Ethan does homework at the kitchen island, quizzing me on everything from black holes to why onions make you cry. Alex's company thrived too. After the dust settled, he became a better leader, more transparent, more willing to listen. He coaches Ethan's robotics team on Saturdays, the two of them coming home covered in wire clippings and triumph when their bot finally navigates the maze. Sarah found her footing as well. She started a small design studio specializing in educational materials, apps and books for kids who learn differently. Ethan is her chief tester, and he takes the job very seriously. Helen surprised us most of all. She never became the warm, cookie-baking grandmother from storybooks. That wasn't her. But she became something better. Present. She shows up for school plays, soccer games, science fairs. She learned to text, mostly to send photos of Ethan holding a fish he caught, or standing proudly next to a project volcano that actually erupted on cue. Her comments are still dry, still a little sharp around the edges, but they come wrapped in pride now instead of judgment. Last Christmas, she gave me a gift I didn't expect. A framed photo from Ethan's 6th birthday party, the one with the dinosaur cake. In it, I'm kneeling next to him, helping him light the candles while he beams at the camera. Helen had written on the back in her neat slanted handwriting, "To the woman who taught us all how to make room, with gratitude." I keep it on my desk at work, right next to the latest journal article with my name on the cover. Some nights, when the apartment is quiet and Ethan's asleep down the hall, Alex and I sit on the balcony with a glass of wine and watch the city lights. We don't talk about the past much anymore. There's no need. The scars are there, faint but visible, like stretch marks on skin, proof of growth, not damage. I think back sometimes to that younger version of me, standing in the kitchen with a folder full of evidence, heart pounding but voice steady. I wonder what she'd think of this life we built from the wreckage. I think she'd be proud. Not because we won some dramatic showdown, but because we chose something harder. Forgiveness without forgetting. Boundaries without walls. Love that makes space for truth. Ethan wanders out one evening in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, looking for a glass of water. He pauses between us, leans his head against my shoulder for a moment, then Alex's. "Night," he mumbles, and pads back inside. Alex watches him go, then turns to me. "We did okay, didn't we?" I lace my fingers through his. We did better than okay. The city hums below us, alive and imperfect. And up here, in our little corner of it, everything is exactly as it should be. Not because it was easy, but because we chose, every day, to keep showing up. For each other. For Ethan. For the complicated, messy, beautiful family we became. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge of all. A life so full of love and truth that the pain of the past barely casts a shadow anymore. Just light. Everywhere light. And that, my friends, is how the truth, delivered calmly, backed by undeniable evidence, and wrapped in grace, turned what could have been a shattered family into something stronger, messier, and far more real than anyone ever imagined. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. Not the pain, not the patience, not the quiet nights gathering facts while my heart ached. Because every step led to this. A life filled with love that doesn't demand perfection, only presence. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me through this entire journey. Your comments, your messages, your quiet support, they mean the world to me. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you think, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share these real-life stories every week to remind us all that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way forward, if we're brave enough to choose it. You're not alone. We're in this together. See you in the next one.